Klezmer music. If you don't know what klezmer music is, Bing it. What's Bing again? Klezmer music is, of course, the folk music of Jewish people. Now, klezmer is strangely similar to Balkan music in the fact that it uses that same scale we talked about. Which is funny because them and the Jews don't always get along, but they use the same scale of music. Now, the key that klezmer music is almost always played in is the key of D, partly because it's a holy key and because klezmer music, even though now it's played on clarinet, used to be played a lot on violin. And we all know how much violinists love the key of D. This scale in D, this is what we're going to use. There are many subgenres of klezmer music. Let's start with the hora, which is in 3, but not quite 3. It's like a drunken 3 or a staggered 3. The groove is usually this. It's kind of like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. It's not 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If you're playing along with a metronome and it fits, it's wrong. It shouldn't fit with a metronome. So, if we try this as a hora, now, remember Balkan music? It's not the 5 chord that we're used to, A7, because of the scale. Okay, we're going to use C minor, the flat 7 minor, same as Balkan. C minor. This kind of actually does sound like a klezmer tune, to be totally honest. I'm going to try this at the next bat mitzvah I play, I swear. They're not going to notice. So now the Jews do not call this a scale which music theorists would call it, like altered Phrygian. Arabs and Makams would call this Hijaz, like high jazz, but only 1 Z. And the Arabic scale most people are used to has this scale except a raised 7. Which is like even more confusing because it sounds more major. It's like in between major and 7th, where at least the klezmer Phrygish scale is definitely a 7th. It's got the 7th and the flat 9. They consider it a 1 again. That's home base to them. Now, with ornaments on klezmer music, they don't exactly just do. They like doing these skips on the clarinet. The kreksen, try to spell that one, is the most recognizable ornament in klezmer music, and clarinet players do this constantly. But kreksen also don't just come from a note away. A lot of times they will come from far away. So even when I went, I'm going D, G, F sharp to do an ornament. Instead of da da da, I'm going D, C, F sharp. They like really jumping far for their ornaments, which is totally different than any other music I've ever played. Now this is starting to sound klezmer. Horas, when they're done, usually go into a frelix or a bulgar, which is in 4 and fast. So, sound familiar? Just like polka music, that same ending. Mary had a little lamb. classic ending, especially when you play faster tunes in klezmer. Even cut before the end of the phrase is over. Now, there's no discernible difference in when someone's going to go fast or slow. I've seen both in a million different examples. You just kind of feel it. Everybody hopefully feels the same thing, and it usually always works. Everybody feels whether you're going to do the fast one or if you're going to do the slow one. Try that at your next Jewish wedding and see if they know it's Mary Had a Little Lamb. Now to a genre that I definitely know, or at least I think I know, but it takes too long to know it. Jazz. Jazz. Please don't do the jazz hands. That's not anything to do with jazz at all. So the first thing that everyone can agree on, jazz is constant bass lines. Constant bass lines. So we just do that. And jazz, well, we like flat keys. Yeah, we don't like those sharp keys at all. You stay away from those. So let's do the key of A flat. Why not? We haven't used that yet. Okay, so. Yeah, definitely not even close to jazz. We have some work to do. Okay, first of all, let's add some chords, and not just normal chords. Us jazzers love our advanced chords, even if they don't totally make sense. Very boring. Still not jazz. Let's get some electric piano in there, make it more jazzy. And this is the other thing. Let's add some syncopation to the beat. Getting closer. We're missing a very vital aspect of jazz. And that is the fact that the bass lines are not just doom, 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 doom. You have to have the in there when you're playing. Now, in this accordion, I actually have the attached to the bass. So, unlike any band in the world, my drummer and my bass player are perfectly together. Wonderful. So, it's not it's and so on. You have to have the ding, ba-ding, ding, 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 ba-ding, dong, 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 dong. You have to add that in there, or it's not jazz. So now this will sound. Which actually brings me to something in soloing. Jazz is not swung.
No f***ing way.
Okay, it's not swung. Jazz is even eighth notes with accents, usually, but not always, on the upbeats, making it sound like it's D, 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 D. It's not. It's actually D, 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 but with accents saying D, 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 which makes it sound like it's D, 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 D. Okay, that's something to go for a whole other video. It's not really swung. It's only the slower stuff that's swung. So if I was soloing, it's not. That's not jazz. That will immediately get all the jazz cats to go, you're... And also, lastly, with these bass lines, it's not... You're going to get to these chord changes with chromatics. And then with the da-da-da-da-da-da. That's what you want in your bass lines. That is jazz. And now, Myron is going to do the polka. A 1 and a 2 and...
Bobby Burgess introduced his new dancing partner, Sissy King, to our television audience just a few weeks ago. The wonderful comments we've received have made Sissy, Bobby, and all of us very happy. Let's watch this delightful couple as they dance to the Pennsylvania polka. 1 and 2 and...
Yes, it's that dreaded time where I'm going to do polka, which I don't usually do. This is that genre I try to stay away from. The polka is quite fun. It is. Although I don't really drink it all, so that doesn't help in October. Especially when 3 polkas in a row in the key of C is, that's it. So, polka. Very straight. This is not jazz, where you're behind the beat, or piet solo, where you mix between ahead of the beat and behind the beat, depending on how you feel through the measure. This is right on it. Now, polka, major, minor, major. Of course, there are many different kinds of polkas, whether we're talking Slovenian polka, Polish polka, German polka. There's a lot. It's not just one kind. And if you go to Cleveland, they'll say, we have Cleveland polka. And that's their genre. Remember, the state song of Pennsylvania is the Pennsylvania polka. So if you're from Pennsylvania watching this song, do know that in case you go on Pennsylvania Jeopardy. It started in Scranton. It's now #1. So if we have major and a very straight time, and of course 4/4 here, and could do C. Polkas usually stay in pretty common keys, B flat or so, 2D. We'll just use G. I kind of hate C. People know that about me. I hate the key of C. Ugh. So it'd be this. Something's missing. It's a little boring. Well, polka, of course, has big chords when you're the accordion player. Except they play a different kind of accordion in certain genres of this. Now, in the button diatonic accordion, you don't play full chords. You actually play chords like this. This kind of setup. So if I'm here in G, I'm using 3, 1, 3 in the chord. That's the form you want to use the chords on. It sounds slightly different overall, but it makes quite a difference in the specific of the genre. Now, of course, with accordion players, we love notes, and polkas, we definitely love to do arpeggios. It could be rollbacks, like I call them. Double rollback. Or, of course, you can do bellow shakes. This is a very accordion thing, let me tell you. But not just bellow shakes, you need to accent them. Now, we have to add a little bit to this. It needs to be the classic intros, maybe. And also, at the end of phrases, or especially at the end of a whole chorus, you might do... Or, oh yeah, how could I forget? Sorry. Thank you, Myron, thank you. And now, on to another genre.